Welcome to our webinar today, hosted by NFU Energy and NFU. So this webinar is focusing on the Laying Hen Housing for Health and Welfare grant. So the essential guidance for poultry farmers. So really glad that some of you were able to join this morning. What we'll do for those that miss it or can't make it all, we'll add this to our YouTube channel following the webinar so people can watch it back if needed. So my name is Gemma, so I'm the Head of Marketing here at NFU Energy, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce you to our NFU Support Schemes team. So we've got Richard Wordsworth, who is our NFU Senior Advisor for Support Schemes, and Fergus Starkey, Advisor for Support Schemes. So they'll be able to run you through everything you need to know about this grant. Following on from them, we'll then introduce you to Thomas. So Thomas works at NFU Energy and is our renewable specialist. So he'll be able to talk about the solar side of the grant in more detail. So on registration, we've received some questions through already. We will come to all questions at the end of the webinar. So if you do have a question that you'd like to ask, pop it into the Q&A feature or the chat option on this screen, and I will come to all questions at the end. Okay, so let's make a start. So just a bit of an introduction for those that don't know much about NFU Energy. So we're one of the UK's leading and trusting providers of sustainable energy solutions. We are owned by the NFU, so NFU members get preferential rates on our services. So not only do we manage energy contracts for farmers at preferential rates, we also offer a wide range of energy services, so everything from energy management, energy consultancy services. So we offer energy efficiency audits where we get to go out onto farm and look at how farms can become more energy efficient. We also offer feasibility studies, so those that are looking into transitioning to renewable energy, we can see if that's a viable option for your business. So everything along the lines of sort of energy compliance, so making sure that you're up to date with your RHI, we also help there as well. So everything that's energy related, we can help, and obviously as a member of the NFU, you get preferential rates on our services. So I will pass over to Richard Wordsworth, who is going to talk you through the grant. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Gemma, and morning, everybody. So over the next sort of 10, 11 slides, I'll kick off this section and I'll pass over to Fergus as we go through. So moving on to the first slide there, Gemma. Thank you. So what we're going to cover today is the Laying Hen Housing for Health and Welfare grant. Now, I suppose that what we're trying to do today is just give you an overview. There's quite a bit of detail. We've got references to where that can be found at the end of our section of the presentation. The key thing here to have in mind is that this is actually a welfare grant, which just happens to be focused in on infrastructure around laying hen housing. So if you take it in that context, then that's the ethos and the sort of policy behind this. This isn't about just simply building sheds, etc., etc. This is actually about animal health and welfare and the provision of that. So the key aim of any project that goes through this is to obviously improve laying hen and pullet health and welfare, increase environmental sustainability, and possibly introduce innovation if that's possible. Where a project that could be grant funded under this opportunity achieves these three priorities, then it's more likely to be accepted and grant funding offered to the individual. So moving on to the bit more detail on the grant offering. The basis of the funding, all projects must meet legal requirements for keeping laying hens. The grant here is offering funding to take farmers' delivery of animal health and welfare above the legal minimum standards. So that's the basis of why the grant is being offered at this point in time. Also critical here, it's not about flock expansion. the grant here cannot be used directly to fund expansion of flocking or densities of flocking, because and this will be demonstrated if people do eventually end up with a greater number of birds housed than where they started from, because the grant will be pro rata reduced, so that it effectively only pays for the element that is being replaced or into on that side. So the application process, I'm sure most of you may have already been aware of this, but it's obviously an online only application process. Full projects and those who will be shortlisted will probably know that by October this year onwards, and the online checker and initial applications closes on just before midnight on the 18th of September. So the reason for this webinar today is to go through that. There are two elements to the two ways that the grant can be accessed. One is a comprehensive project, and the other one is a veranda-only project. The comprehensive project effectively is upgrade, either refurbish or indeed replace with new buildings so that bring them up to the standards that the grant will offer to. There are a number of mandatory elements to the comprehensive project, which do include a veranda being part of that project, along with a number of other elements such as multi-tiered systems, mechanical ventilation, LED lights, biosecurity, and provision of solar. The veranda-only project is simply, as it says on the tin, it is to add a veranda to an existing poultry building to deliver more health and welfare. In terms of definitions, again, not trying to necessarily tell grannies how to suck eggs here, excuse the pun, but laying hens are referred to here as female domestic chickens over at 17 weeks old, kept for table egg production, while a pullet is referred to as a female domestic chicken less than 18 weeks old, which is being reared for table egg production. So that is defined, and I think that's probably a reasonably well understood definition. So moving on to a few more elements around the grant. Eligible buildings, the rules state that buildings must provide high levels of biosecurity, excellent ambient environment, maximise space available, ensuring full and safe accessibility to all birds. Upgrading of existing buildings includes primarily looking at the interior, such as removing flat deck and putting in multi-tier systems. Critically here, and we've already had some questions from members to this point, old buildings cannot be used for poultry activity if they're not demolished, i.e. if you're building a new building on the same site as where the old building was, the old building effectively has to be mothballed and not used for poultry production. Solar PV is the other element, and I know Tom's going to talk about that in a lot more detail, but obviously there is an element here around solar PV systems can be funded on buildings to contribute to the enhancing of the environmental sustainability here, given the energy needs of such housing. So moving on to just a bit more detail on the veranda. It's defined as a fixed structure with a solid roof and floor, which is outside and immediately next to the main building. It extends the internal litter, so scratch area, and provides birds with access to natural daylight and fresh air. The floor area of any veranda funded as part of either the comprehensive or the veranda-only project must not be included in the calculations for stocking capacity, even if the birds have access to it 24 hours a day. Critically here also, the buildings must be permanent, non-movable, securely attached to the foundations, and must be used for the intended use for at least a minimum of 5 years after grant has been completed and project completed on that side. So a number of strings attached here. In terms of who can apply, it's aimed at existing commercial egg producers or pullet rearers. They're the target audience here, and they must have at least registered at least 1,000 birds or more on the unit. These birds must be on site when the online checker is completed, or moved onto site within 6 months of that being completed. In terms of the location of the project, the buildings unfortunately must be located in England. This is an England-only grant offer. Doesn't unfortunately cover our members in Wales at this point in time, because obviously ag policy is devolved in that respect. So, and obviously if the building is being replaced, then it needs to be on the same site as the existing building, as we just talked about. This is open to tenants as well as land owner occupiers. As with a lot of these large grants, that the key thing here is that that the tenant has at least 5 years occupation control of the land post the project, as set out in the previous condition. And if that's not possible, then the landlord would need to underwrite the agreement, though that obviously that confirmation wouldn't necessarily be required until the full application is submitted at that point in time. So a number of points there. Just moving on to the next slide, where I'm just now going to pass over to Fergus, who's going to go through a little bit more detail about the application and some number of other elements to be aware of. Over to you, Fergus.
Thanks, Richard, and good morning, everybody. So in terms of applying for this grant in particular, it is a two-stage process. For those of you who potentially have already submitted on the online checker, you will have already completed stage 1. For those of you who are looking potentially to submit through the online checker, that is the first step in the application process there. If you are successfully shortlisted, then you will then be invited to submit a full application, which will be later in the year. It is worth bearing in mind that you can only apply for one type of project. You can either go for a comprehensive project or the veranda only. There's not an option to mix and match between the two. You can do multiple projects of the same type. So of course, if you have got multiple housing buildings that you're looking to renovate and improve, you could, under the comprehensive, obviously through the comprehensive project, look to update multiple of those as long as you stay within the funding thresholds for the grant. If we could pop onto the next slide, please. So success in the grant depends on which theme you go through. If you are on the comprehensive project, as Richard mentioned earlier, it is a health and welfare grant, but obviously there's elements there of introducing innovation and promoting environmental sustainability. Those are the points that the grant will be scored on, and that will be the likelihood of success is how strongly you can score on those principles if you are looking to go through a comprehensive project. So you will need to potentially look at that and decide if that's going to be the route for you and how you can potentially make that as strong an application as possible. If you're only looking at the veranda-only project, then they are going to be served on a first-come, first-served basis. If there is the risk of oversubscription there will be a waiting list that will be implemented for individuals who are looking at those kinds of opportunities there. It is important to note that you do have to make sure that the application covers the same project that was used in the initial application. Now, RPA is understanding that obviously some minor details may change, potentially quoted figures may be a bit different now that we're, depending on what's going on in certain markets for those kinds of things there. But by and large, it still has to be what it was that you submitted to the initial checker needs to be what goes into that final application that they will then consider. Now, following the review of the initial applications, the RPA expect to start inviting eligible applicants to make full applications from October 2024. Now, if you're a bit concerned about what you need to put into that full application, there is guidance set out online on the gov.uk website, which gives you that run through of exactly what it is you need. So it's really important that you do go through that information and make sure that you are checking that what's in your project is matching what's asked. And the main reason for this is because if you can submit a full application that has all the information to hand, it makes it a lot easier for the RPA to make it quite a speedy process to get through and assess and then give you an answer on your application there. If it can become a bit difficult for people if the RPA are bouncing emails between applicants and themselves trying to get bits of information that weren't originally submitted. Some of the things that do need to be considered if you are planning to go through to, if you are invited to the full application stage, a significant issue is planning permission. It is likely that planning permission is going to be needed for a project, so just double check as you're progressing through that you've obviously got that to hand if you do need it and obviously have gone through the planning system to get to that stage there. If you're one of the larger producers, you may also need to have a look at environmental permits. So if you're a producer with more than 40,000 birds, you'll obviously need to look at a variation to your existing environmental permit. If you're one of the producers with fewer than 40,000 birds, but as a side effect of the grant and obviously the consequential increase in capacity, if that does lead you to more than 40,000 birds, they will also need to apply for a new environmental permit. The reason why all of this is quite important is that within the grant itself, it is the applicant's responsibility to make sure that all of these are in place before a full application is submitted. So one of the recommendations they have is that you make it clear on any permit request that the reason why this application has gone in, for whether it's planning or an environmental permit, is for the fact that you're doing it as a part of the Laying Hen for Health and Welfare grant. And that just helps signpost to other government bodies and local planning authorities that you are doing this on the back of a government grant, and that, you know, it hopefully would get them to speed the process up internally there and not have it languishing in the planning system for longer than it needs to be. In terms of the rooftop solar funding, this is only eligible for comprehensive projects, and it is important to note that the minimum grant amounts that are specified for this grant, they don't include any rooftop solar systems there. So if you are looking at this as an option for your housing update, overhaul, whatever it is that you have planned for it, it is just bearing in mind that it obviously isn't factored into those minimum costs that they show for the grant. Now, it does obviously contribute to that aspect of environmental sustainability and obviously the enhancements that come with that there. It isn't mandatory, so it is an optional one if you choose to include it, but it is worth bearing in mind that even if you don't include it, there is still an expectation that you have the capacity to have it on any new poultry housing that is obviously produced as an outcome of the project. So you don't necessarily have to put a full system in, but should you want to in the future, the minimum threshold come the end of a comprehensive project is at least you would be able to, because of the new poultry housing that's been constructed under your project there. So in terms of what funding is available, and again, this will depend on which theme for the projects that you go through, the grant funding is available up to 40% of the eligible costs of a project, and there is a allocated budget of 22 million allocated to the grant. If you're looking at a comprehensive project, the minimum grant amount is £15,000, and you do have a maximum amount of £500,000 per applicant business. And again, as mentioned on the last slide, that minimum doesn't obviously factor in costs linked to rooftop solar systems. If you are installing a solar system, it's only available for the cost and installation of these based on the power requirements of 5 kilowatts per 1,000 birds within the building. And what they will then do is fund up to 25% of the eligible costs of that installation and that process to obviously have that system up and running. If you're looking at a veranda-only project, then the funding is a bit less in that regard, because obviously it's not as extensive as completely overhauling the housing units. Its minimum is obviously £5,000, whereas the maximum is £100,000. But again, the main thing to be aware of here as well is that obviously veranda projects cannot claim any support for rooftop solar funding, obviously, as you'd expect, because it is just for the verandas to be included on the existing buildings. In terms of claiming payment, and this one can be a bit difficult, obviously, if you're looking down the line, you think, oh, well, claiming payment's a bit of a way away from where we are at the moment, but there is some important things just to be aware of here, especially so that you don't end up tripping up a few years down the line. So payments can be claimed after the project work is finished and has been paid for. Throughout the length of a project, you can have a maximum of 3 claims. Now, work must not begin, and this includes paying any deposits, signing any contracts, placing any orders until you have your project start date. Now, your project start date will be included in what's called a grant funding agreement, otherwise known as a GFA document, and that sets out effectively all of the expectations placed on you by the RPA, but also that start date, which is really, really quite important. If you do incur any costs before that start date that is outlined in your agreement, you do run the risk of rendering your entire project ineligible because you'll have jumped the gun, so to speak. So it is really important that you don't do anything related to your project before that date, mainly for your own peace of mind, but equally not to invoke any penalties and have your entire project thrown out purely because you were trying to get something in, potentially a bit quicker than the agreement would have allowed you to do. It is important to note, if as a part of your project you do have any items on lease purchases or hire purchases, they do need to be owned outright before you can make any claims against them. So you can't claim if you've only paid half of the purchase figure on them. If there's still outstanding payments there, they do need to be out and out owned by the business there. It's also important to note that you do need to be able to fund the remaining project costs from eligible sources. And again, these are set out on the online guidance. So if you are concerned about where your funding's coming from, you can obviously double check it there and make sure that it does match what's listed there. Another element to be really aware of here is obviously this grant is paid in arrears of eligible spending. So again, you may need to factor that into whether it's cash flow modelling or just looking at the viability of it in the long term. There is obviously that consequence there of it being paid in arrears and what impact that might have for you and your business. Also, another point to be quite aware of is that there is a list of items that the grant will not pay for. And it's just important to be aware of those, because what you don't want to do is come to the end of your project and obviously think that you're having a number of additional services that you had as part of the project being funded, and actually they turn out to not be funded. So it is really important to double check and just make sure that you, for your own understanding, have a really good, clear idea of what it is exactly that the grant is funding, what isn't funded, and then obviously planning as may need be for the duration of your project, what will potentially be coming out of your pocket, what will be coming out of the funding, and so on from there. So in terms of where you can find more information, the full guidance is available on gov.uk at that following link there, and they've got a very comprehensive breakdown of all the information that you need relating to that grant, whether it's to do with terms and conditions, whether it's to do with specific options, all of the basic information you'd need to understand the opportunity that this grant is providing would be available on there. However, if you do have further questions or concerns, or there's something that you're not quite sure of, you can also contact the RPA. Now, you can email them at the following email address there, or you can also contact them on that phone number and obviously follow the options through to the Farming Transformation Fund, and you can speak to somebody there who'd be able to direct you to give you support in that sphere there.
Thank you, Fergus. No, that was brilliant. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Thomas Ovenden, who is our Renewable Energy Solutions and Channel Manager, who can help talk you through the solar aspect of the grant. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Gemma. And yeah, thank you, Richard and Fergus, for a very comprehensive overview of the grant thus far. Yeah, as Gemma mentioned, I will be covering off how NFU Energy can hopefully support any applicants for the grant, and how specifically our Renewable Energy Solutions service can support. So Renewable Energy Solutions is our service that will provide reputable installer recommendations to interested parties for installation of renewable energy technologies. This covers off a wide variety of technologies, as kind of wide branching as we possibly can, and all of the installers that we work with have been subject to due diligence from our internal team, and we will then engage in sort of a partnership agreement or partnership contract with the installer so that we can conduct work through them. But all of that work will be reviewed internally by NFU Energy as well. The service has been operating rather successfully for about 3 years now, and every year we continue to offer a wider variety of opportunities and services across a variety of different technologies and opportunities. As it currently stands, there are 16 installers. This branches across solar PV, which would be most applicable to this grant here, wind turbines, electric vehicle charging and heat pumps. There are many other services along the lines of metering and monitoring, anaerobic digestion and more. So if there's anything beyond that that you are interested in, please feel free to inquire and we'll gladly talk it through. We do also partner with a number of developers as well. These are our partners that take care of the larger sort of solar farm projects or battery farm projects, those where landowners are looking to lease land to a company to then kind of develop a solar PV development or solar PV farm for a sort of passive income or lease. All of our recommended installers will be tailored to the specific project that you are inquiring about. So we will have a bit of a discussion first, ensure that we have a deep understanding of the project that you are looking to undertake. And through our relationship with all of our installers, we can ensure that the project is passed to the most appropriate installer for that project. And we will stay in touch with both yourself and the installer throughout to ensure that it proceeds as planned and with the intended result at the end. The service also operates alongside the wider NFU team. This includes our in-house consultancy and our projects team, so our engineers, our consultants, our sort of compliance managers, ensuring that they provide their expertise to any of the referrals, and also alongside any NFU service assets, such as all of our planning consultancies and NFU Mutual themselves as well. So the process for a Renewable Energy Solutions opportunity, usually we would try and start it with some technical consultancy work done by our projects team. This could be a feasibility study, an energy audit, or it could come off the back of something almost unrelated, such as an amendment to a feed-in tariff scheme or such. That would then be passed along to our internal Renewable Energy Solutions team, or RES team, and that would be subject to a desktop review, where we would ideally have a bit of a discussion over the phone, ensure that we are understanding exactly what project you have in mind, how we can assist you or support you as best as possible, and that would then be sort of compiled into one renewables form or a referral form. This would then be passed along to our installation partner, whoever we have deemed most appropriate and most suitable for carrying out the project as best as possible. The installation partner will then run through their process. We leave it up to them. They are, of course, the experts in that matter. But any quotes that are generated by our partners will be subject to what we call a tech check. This is essentially a review of any generated work, quote, or proposal to ensure that the price is accurate, that it meets the current sort of competitive standard, that all of the hardware recommended is of the highest tier, and that it does actually meet the requirements of the project that we have previously discussed. If you are happy with the quote and we are happy with the quote, then we recommend signing and proceeding with the installer. But if any amendments need to be made, then we can ensure that happens. This would then lead to the installation process itself. A date would be set, the work would begin to carry out, would ensure that this meets the timeline that the installer has set out. There's no sort of delays beyond the unexpected. And once everything is installed, there is the option of post-installation support and advice, whether that comes from the installer themselves offering a operation and maintenance package, whether that's from NFU Energy ourselves, for example, ensuring the system is compliant and working as intended, or otherwise we are happy to support. And as I mentioned, there is, of course, the installer's own process. Each of them have their own, but this is a assumption or assessment of what most of our installers would carry out. There should be an introductory call within 2 weeks of the referral. We would let you know that that is happening and the name of the installer, so you know who to expect the call from. Usually it does happen well within the 2 weeks, I'd say a week at most usually, but depending on different installers' workloads and times of year, obviously that can fluctuate. If applicable, the installer would visit the site and perform their assessment, ensure that, if need be, a structural assessment is performed of the building that the solar PV would go on, or a wider sort of desktop review of the site. If, for example, a wind turbine, they would have to assess whether there's any planning requirements, any permissions required, any wayleaves and easements. So there is, of course, that initial review. Once that's performed, a quote will be prepared by our installer. This will be sent to yourselves as well as to NFU Energy. This is when the tech check would occur, assessed by us internally, and a bit of a discussion about whether it's something that you are happy to proceed with. If it is, of course, you can then sign the quote, proceed. The installer should propose a date for the installation and when each portion of the work would be carried out and when each payment would be incurred. Usually with solar PV specifically, but most technologies, an application does need to be made to the district network operator, or DNO, to ensure that the project scale is suitable with the grid infrastructure in your area, that there is the capacity to export any necessary energy, or to ensure that, if it is a income specified project, as many turbines are and some number of solar PV applications are, then there is that capacity to export and produce some income for yourselves. After that, there is, of course, the installation and subsequent commission of the project, make sure that everything's working perfectly. Once commissioned, the client should receive the post-installation documents. This ensures that you have all the necessary certifications needed to set up, for example, an export contract, and to ensure the project is now in your hands. Most installers do offer a maintenance package as well moving forward, at least the first few years, just to ensure that everything is performing as intended, that there's no unexpected drops in performance, and that you are getting the full benefit of the system that you have now had fitted on your farm. For example, one specific case study that would be suitable here is one farmer had a shed housing approximately 16,000 birds. Their energy demand was just shy of 60,000 kilowatt hours or units per year, despite an existing 8 kilowatt solar PV system. That existing system was claiming the feed-in tariff. It had been operating for about 10 years or so. So we wanted to ensure that system was left alone, that we didn't invalidate the feed-in tariff in any way, as that was providing a lovely form of income for the farmer. Our installer quoted a 40 kilowatt peak project at £36,000, so that works out as £900 per kilowatt installed. That's well within the remit of the prices that we would expect to see. At the moment, we would expect anywhere from sort of £850 to £1,000 per kilowatt is very good. That's as expected. Anything lower than that would be ideal. At that price, we saw a payback period of under 5 years, so the system would generate enough income or savings within that time to pay off that £36,000 initial investment. Over the full lifetime of the system, so roughly 25 years or so, the savings were upwards of £170,000, proving that the system itself is 5-6 times more valuable than it was at the beginning, and the generated energy in relation to the system cost worked out as 6p per kilowatt hour instead of the 26 pence that the customer was paying. So it worked out very effectively. Worked out, was that sort of 4 or 5 times cheaper to generate energy at that price than it was on their initial contract. Part of the grant is to ensure that you are being as environmental as possible with your system. This system would have saved the client 6.6 tons of carbon emissions annually. So that is a real benefit in terms of meeting the grant specifications. Under the grant, the client would have been eligible for up to 80 kilowatt peak solar PV system at 5 kilowatts per 1,000 birds. But in this case, they wouldn't have needed a system of that size. It would have generated a lot of surplus energy in the summer and would have maybe meant a little bit more energy was offset in the winter periods. But it worked out most economically to have that 40 kilowatt PV system. So it may not be that you need to meet the full scale of the grant that's been recommended, but I think at least there is the option to go as large as that if required. On this specific project, the client would have saved £9,000 on the current project cost. So it highlights a great saving of 25% on projects if you do proceed with the solar PV system on the sheds. So onto how NFU Energy can support with the actual grant applications. We are now offering a service to support with that moving forwards. At the moment, it is currently limited to the solar specific sections of these grants. We found that is the area where most applicants would need support. The rest of the grant is limited to sort of personal or business details. So usually that is quite easy to complete. And then the solar side is where a little bit more support is needed. And that's where we can offer our expertise. At the moment, this is operated for the Laying Hen Housing, as we are discussing. So when the full applications open, that is an offer that we will be making. And it is currently available to those running through the Improving Farm Productivity Round 2 funding. That is now closed to new applicants, but those with full applications in progress can receive support if required. The service is operated entirely internal within NFU Energy, and if required, we can complete within 2 weeks. However, this is subject to data collection. This will require us retrieving any data from the client themselves, as well as either the installers, those that have generated the quotes for these projects, as well as the Rural Payments Agency if any additional information is required. We would attempt to only use NFU Energy approved installers for these quotes. This ensures that we are accountable for all of the work that has been done. We know that the installers will be able to carry out that work within certain timelines. We have an existing relationship to ensure that all information is acquired as needed, and we know that their prices and their hardware is going to suit the requirements of the grant. At the moment, 3 quotes are required for any item above £5,000. So for most solar PV systems, that would be appropriate, and we can certainly ensure that when the time comes. So this is just brief dates again to cover off what Fergus and Richard have already covered, but the initial checker will be live until the 18th of September, and full applications are expected to go live in October. However, the exact date has not been confirmed yet to my knowledge. If it is similar to previous full applications that we have seen, this will include a Word document and an Excel spreadsheet that need to be completed, as well as any supporting documents that need to be included in the full application. In terms of the Word document, that's a multi-page document with, I think, previous ones have been about 9 sections. and the solar one pertains to about 4 or 5 of those sections. And the Excel spreadsheet would be where you break down the costs of each quote, or in this, if we were helping with the solar side of it, then it would be all of the items included in that system, such as the panels, the inverters, the batteries, if appropriate, and any additional electrical works and equipment beyond that. The rooftop solar PV systems are available at 25% funding on 5 kilowatts per 1,000 birds. As we saw in the previous case study, a 16,000 bird farm will be applicable up to 880 kilowatt peak, but that isn't always the maximum won't always be required. So it's worth having an initial discussion just to determine how large a system may be needed for the farm, and then working to make that as suitable or appropriate as possible. The solar PV system will contribute to the environmental sustainability of the project, meeting some of those grant requirements. However, if you are going for the solar PV system, you must still meet the comprehensive project specifications that Richard and Fergus laid out previously. In terms of how we would run through the grant application service, in the beginning, we would want the project details from the applicant themselves, ensuring that we know as much about the project as possible, and we would then refer this over to ideally 3 of our installers to ensure that they can then begin preparing the quotes, and those quotes would need to be itemized so we can break down per item, such as the panels, inverters again. Second from that, we would collect the data from the installers, such as the quotes and such, as well as any additional details from the client or the applicant, so that we have all the details that the Rural Payments Agency have sent over so far, such as project reference number, etc. We would then liaise with the Rural Payments Agency on any questions that have arisen for your specific project to ensure that they are answered and taken care of within the application. We would agree on which sections of the Word document and the Excel spreadsheet are going to be completed by NFU Energy so that we can focus on those. You, the applicant, can focus on your sections, and then we can ensure that those are merged and sent off together for the full application. Any final review can be completed by NFU Energy just to ensure that we are meeting all of the requirements and specifications laid out, and then documents will be returned to the applicant to submit to the Rural Payments Agency as your full application. In terms of environmental permitting, as Fergus mentioned, if your site is over 40,000 birds, or through the introduction of the project increases to above 40,000 birds, you may need either an environmental permit or an environmental permit variation. The Environment Agency do offer some pre-application advice. There is both a basic model and an enhanced model, which is a paid service. But additionally, NFU Energy can support with either initial advice or utilising our channel partners, such as either our partnership with NFU Poultry or any of our additional sort of consultants or agencies that we work alongside that we can utilise to submit these environmental permits. We can ensure that that is entirely taken care of if required. But please get in touch if that is part of the application that you would need support with. These permissions do need to be in place before the full application is made, so I would recommend reaching out either around the time of the initial checker or once you've been approved for the full application. Let us know so that we can begin that sort of dialogue prior to you submitting the full application. In terms of any associated services that we can offer that would coincide with the grant applications, of course, I mentioned at the beginning, the technical consultancy is where a lot of our renewables projects begin. If you were unsure on the size of the project that would be most appropriate for your site, I can recommend a feasibility study. This would involve our engineers and our consultants modelling different size systems, whether this is sort of solar PV, whether that includes any battery models or not, to ensure that you are getting the most appropriately sized system to offset your energy demand as best as possible, while remaining as financially viable as well, ensuring that you are not overpaying for a system, or you're not putting on a system that is oversized and over-engineered that would actually end up not producing the greatest amount of savings for your site. If your worry was more that your site is not as energy efficient as possible, then we can conduct an energy audit. And feasibility studies and energy audits can be combined in conjunction as well to ensure one project that covers off both applications. We do provide compliance of existing systems as well. So if you have existing solar PV system, perhaps with a feed-in tariff, or existing boilers with Rural Renewable Heat Incentive, RHI, or a combined heat and power unit, CHPQA stands for Combined Heat and Power Quality Assurance. These are all services that we can offer through our in-house consultancy as well. And in terms of planning permission required for the solar PV systems, they should fall under permitted development rights as they are rooftop systems. However, usually as part of the application, you may need to provide proof that the system falls under permitted development. We can acquire this through our planning partners through the NFU as well. I'll now pass back to Gemma to chair any questions.
Thanks, Tom. No, that's great. Fabulous presentation. So now is a perfect time for us to go to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring everyone back so we can see everybody. So we had some questions come in initially via registration. So I will start with them. So one question was, I'm very interested in the grant. However, I have an old wooden flat deck sheds with very low eave height. The veranda is really not an option, but the comprehensive scheme says it is mandatory. It is not a BEIC line code requisite nor an RSPCA requisite. So why is it mandatory for the grant application? Will there be exemptions? I will pass this over to Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Gemma. And this question has come up a couple of times to date from Poultry members. Yes, obviously, as I said at the start, this is aimed at a higher level of welfare for the birds than is the legal minimum. Obviously, the question poser also references other schemes that are also available and that people will be signed up to or be aware of. But at the moment, the grant offer has that mandatory element of a veranda being part of that comprehensive, and I know that has caused some challenges for some members, and no doubt this member, particularly because of the building that it could be associated with. So unfortunately, that's the offer at the moment. We have raised that and challenged that with the Defra team through NFU Poultry and ourselves, and unfortunately, yeah, at the moment that is the offer. I haven't heard anything about an exemption at this point in time.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And just a reminder for those that are on the call that do have any questions, you can pop them into the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and I will get to your question. So on to the second question that's come through then. So this member has poultry buildings based in Wales as well as England. Are they not eligible?
So yeah, if I can pick that one up as well, Gemma. Yes. So unfortunately, this scheme is being offered through Defra via the Rural Payments Agency, who are obviously the deliverer and manager of the scheme, and so it is for poultry producers based and located in England. Obviously, we will have members that will have sites potentially across the whole of the UK, but this is connected to sites and activity in England at this point in time. The devolved nature of farm support policy, this is the result of that, I'm afraid. So I'm not aware of any activity in other parts of the UK, but I stand to be corrected on that. But if that, we can take that question away from the member, and we can also we can clarify that with our colleagues from NFU Cymru.
Super, thanks, Richard. So on to the next question, which I believe has probably been covered in Tom's slides, but I'll ask it anyway for anyone that missed it. So how can the NFU or NFU Energy help with getting planning consent and permits? Thomas.
Yeah, I think that was somewhat covered off, but I'm happy to repeat. In terms of the planning permissions, I would say that in terms of the solar PV system, it should fall under permitted development as a rooftop solar PV system, but it's likely that you will need to prove that it does fall under those permitted development rights. I would recommend speaking to one of the NFU planning consultancies just to acquire a certificate that can prove that. So that would be either PWA planning, CT planning, Acorus. I think all of the NFU planning consultancies could certainly take care of that. If it's regarding the sort of environmental permits, yeah, I think get in touch with us. We can then ensure that if you do meet the requirements of sort of 40,000 birds or above, we can have a bit of a discussion around that and ensure that the environmental permit is taken care of prior to your application.
No, that's great. Thanks, Thomas. And for everybody, accessing the NFU's partners, the planners, I would probably advise just giving NFU Call First a call. They can direct you to the relevant planner. So that's how you can get in touch with those. Same with us at NFU Energy. If you don't have our number, give Call First a call and they can transfer you straight through to us. Okay, so next question. So when the grant says the roof needs to be able to hold solar panels, what level of upgrade would be needed above a normal shed roof? And I'll pass that to Thomas.
Of course. It would depend a little bit on what is considered a normal shed roof. For example, if it's a corrugated metal roof, that is usually fine for solar PV systems. You would need for example, a roof anchor or roof brackets that a mounting rail will be fitted upon, and then the panels will be fitted upon that. That should be zero problem for the installer. If it's a roof such as fibre cement, some additional safety requirements would need to be taken care of. You'd either need to ensure a structural assessment has taken place. I think most of the installers can certainly take care of that. They certainly would either have that ability in-house or a partner that they work alongside very regularly that could take care of that. If it is a fibre cement roof, there may need to be some additional reinforcements such as purlins under the roof, and the panels will need to be ensured that they fit within those reinforced sections. And usually there'll be some sort of netting and scaffolding required for the health and safety of the installer as well. But yeah, I'm hoping that answers sufficiently.
Super. No, thanks, Thomas. Final question that came in pre-registration. So can NFU Energy give an indication on how quickly they could support, given there may be a number of members that would be seeking the grant application services?
I think this would be subject to data collection, both from the installers and from the applicant themselves. And if there are any unexpected questions or queries that arise that would need to be negotiated with the Rural Payments Agency, if we did have all the data collected and ready to go, then I'd say a 2-week turnaround time is how quickly we could get the agreed sections of the application form submitted and then back to the client for final submission.
Super, thanks, Thomas. I've seen a question come through via the chat, so thanks, Jonathan. So if replacing an existing shed, how much larger than the existing footprint could it be? And would the total new area of shed be covered by the grant? I will pass this to either Richard or Fergus.
Yeah, thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm just having a look at the guidance now. I suppose the starting point here is where you are at the moment, and the size of the shed you've got and the number of birds you've got in your shed. And I'm not suggesting for one moment your shed is overstocked from a health and welfare point of view, but you obviously, you need to have a starting point there to then work to see whether, the new shed would be virtually identical in size, or indeed may need to be of a slightly different dimension to accommodate potentially, even things going from imperial to metric measurements and things like that. And then just picking up on sort of Thomas's point about, the potential height, the aspect of the shed, direction of it, if you're going to then put solar on top. Plus, of course, obviously the veranda would obviously be on the side of the shed. That obviously would naturally have an extension on that side. So yeah, I think probably to probably go further than that, it may be worth just having a catch up with NFU Call First, and we can probably just go into a bit more detail on that side, because obviously it's potentially quite a specific question. Hope that helps, Jonathan.
Thanks, Richard. And possibly another question for you that's come through from Roger. So if a producer has a flat deck building and mothballs it, but builds a new shed with veranda, would the new build be eligible for the grant?
So the critical thing here is obviously there is all the specifications, there is all of the requirements that Fergus referred to in the guidance of what would be expected to be an eligible construction. Providing somebody fulfills the criteria of the scheme, I can't see why somebody wouldn't be eligible for a grant. Bearing in mind, of course, the comprehensive grant is competitive, and that will be determined. How competitive it will be determined by how many people come forward. We've got a grant here of about £22 million. And so if everybody went for a maximum of £500,000, that only goes to 44 different applicants at that point. I suspect that probably may not be where it ends up. So it all depends on, competitiveness, and obviously, again, as Thomas has referred to, those characteristics of what this public money is wanting to try and achieve, which is improved health and welfare, sustainability, environmental footprint on those sides. So that there's a number of factors there that could crank up somebody's score or suppress the score. And in the guidance, actually, there is a section that's quite useful on the things that would enhance somebody's score when the RPA and Defra are looking at the full applications when they come in.
Thanks, Richard. I hope that's answered your questions. Oh, I have another question that's just come in. So is there any grant funding towards battery storage alongside solar PV with a view to being off grid? And would this not need the DNO application process? Thomas?
So I think as part of the solar PV specifications, you can include battery storage as part of the grant funded requirements. I think that would actually probably go a little bit way towards ensuring the sort of environmental sustainability of the project. So I would certainly recommend if it's required, but certainly worth a discussion to ensure that battery storage is required for the project before committing to that. However, I do believe you would still need a DNO application. It's very difficult to go entirely off grid to become entirely self-sufficient. And usually there would still need to be some level of trickle in from the grid themselves. And therefore that agreement would still need to be in place. If your wish is to go entirely off grid, it is possible. It is just difficult. So I would recommend still ensuring that there is some grid feed in place. And as a result, the DNO application would be required.
Thanks, Thomas. I actually see a hand's gone up from Martin, so I'm going to just put you off mute, Martin, and allow camera so you can ask your question. If that's worked. Okay, if you just unmute yourself, that should work. No, we can't hear you. What we'll do is if anybody has any further questions, as I know we're reaching 11 o'clock, what I'll do is I'll put the contact details back on the screen. So any questions that you have, please, send them through to us and we'll make sure that they get answered. Oh, bear with me. Let me just get that back open. And then that way, any questions that you have, we'll make sure that we answer them. And of course, then you can always call through to call first as well. So let me share my screen now.
Whilst you're doing that, Gemma, I'll just acknowledge David Brass's comments there. David, thank you for your comments about co-design, stakeholder engagement. Yes, I'll probably suggest it has been quite a frustrating experience. I said I wasn't close to it, and I'm not suggesting I'm stepping away from recognising the fact. But yes, I think one would hope if there is any further support in this area that some reflection on what the offer currently out there will be taken into account in feedback of the offer.
Thank you, Richard. So we'll draw the webinar to a close, but as I say, for anybody that has any further questions, please do reach out to us. We've got a telephone number there for NFU Energy and our email address. Of course, there's NFU Call First. If you have any more sort of technical and legal questions, then Call First will be able to help answer those. Really appreciate everybody joining today. Is there anything more from our speakers?
I suppose the only thing for Martin is probably, like say, ring NFU Call First, reference this webinar, and we can obviously follow up the question whichever one it was going to be posed to on that side. So rest assured, Martin, we won't leave you hanging without engagement.
Yeah, no apologies. I think it's the way the webinar's set up that we're unable to unmute whoever joins. But yeah, please do get in touch with us and we'll get your questions answered. Thank you again, everybody. Really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you to our speakers. And I hope this session's been useful. As I mentioned, if anybody joined late, we will be putting this webinar onto NFU Energy's YouTube channel, so it can be watched back. And we'll send out an email to everybody that's registered with a link to that. So again, hope you all have a good day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.